She didn't know
Here,
the
you
man
look like
she
you
helped
could
was
use
rich.
this.
She only
wow.
knew
Thank
he
you.
was hungry.
This means a lot.
You're
She
welcome.
gave him her only meal,
Here,
the last
take
food
this.
she could afford
Thank
that
you,
day.
brother.
And for that single
Excuse
act
me,
of
is everything
kindness,
okay?
Yeah,
the
he's
world
all right.
almost destroyed
I
her.
didn't steal anything.
This isn't
We
a
have you
story
on
about
camera.
a billionaire.
No, that wasn't
It's
me.
about what
Tell it to
happens when
security.
kindness becomes a crime.
No, I've
Because
revealed
when money
it.
is missing,
He can't
people
hide from the
stop
truth
asking
anymore.
questions. They accuse. They judge. They
You will
punish.
be fine, Mum.
Fire. Before we begin, subscribe to this channel John Leo Stories if you believe humanity shouldn't depend on status. And like this video if you've ever seen someone judged simply for being poor. Now listen carefully, because the same people who ignored a starving man were the first to accuse the woman who helped him. And what happened next will change the way you see kindness forever. Now let's begin. The day no one saw him. No one noticed the man sitting on the pavement. That was the first thing that struck him, not the cold concrete beneath his legs, not the smell of exhaust in the air, not even the hunger twisting painfully in his stomach. It was the way people looked through him. The city was already awake. Cars rushed past. Horns blared. Shoes clicked against the sidewalk in hurried rhythm. Life moved forward, loud and impatient, while the man remained still, pressed against the brick wall of an old building, his back hunched, his head lowered. His clothes were intentionally worn, too big, stained, torn at the sleeves. His hair was uncombed, his beard rough, his face shadowed with fatigue. A small cardboard sign rested beside him, simple and quiet. Hungry. Anything helps. He didn't lift it. He didn't call out. He didn't plead. He simply held his hand out loosely, palm open, as if even that gesture felt like too much. People passed. A man in a tailored suit glanced at him and scoffed. Lazy, he muttered under his breath. Two teenage boys laughed, one nudging the other. Bet he's faking it, one said, pulling out his phone. Watch this. They dropped a coin just out of reach, filming as it rolled away. The man didn't react. He stared at the ground, jaw tight, eyes dull. A woman clutched her handbag closer as she walked by, fear flickering across her face. Another crossed the street entirely. Someone kicked his shoe by accident and didn't even apologize. Hours passed. Not one person stopped. Hunger became sharper. Not just in his stomach, but in his chest. Because what hurt more than being poor was being unseen. Across the street, a small grocery store door opened, releasing a thin young woman carrying a single plastic bag. She moved slowly, like someone conserving energy. Her clothes were clean but old, her shoes worn at the soles. Her face looked tired, but kind. The bag in her hand was light, too light to belong to someone comfortable. She stepped onto the sidewalk and froze. Her eyes had landed on the man. She didn't look away immediately. That alone was different. The man noticed. He felt it. Slowly, he lifted his gaze. Their eyes met. There was no fear in hers. No disgust. Only hesitation, and something like concern. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure of herself. She glanced down at her bag, then back at him. Finally, she walked closer. "You've been here a while," she said softly. Her voice startled him. "Yes," he replied, his voice low and rough from disuse. She swallowed. "Are you hungry?" The word hit him harder than he expected. "Yes," he said again. This time, there was no pretending. No pride. Just truth. The woman knelt beside him without thinking about the dirt on the ground or the stairs around them. She opened her bag and pulled out a wrapped sandwich and a small bottle of water. It was all she had. She hesitated for half a second, just long enough for the weight of her own hunger to register. Then she handed it to him. "I was going to eat this on my break," she said apologetically. "But, you need it more." The man stared at the food. Then at her face. Something tightened painfully behind his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled, small, shy, almost embarrassed by the attention, and stood up quickly, as if afraid staying longer would make it awkward. "I hope things get better," she added. Then she walked away. She didn't wait for gratitude. She didn't ask his name. She didn't tell anyone what she'd done. She disappeared into the crowd like her kindness was something ordinary. The man unwrapped the sandwich slowly, hands trembling, not from hunger alone, but from something far deeper. He took one bite, and for the first time that day, he had to look away from the world because his vision blurred. Her name, he would later learn, was Emily Carter. And the man she had just helped was Jonathan Hale, one of the wealthiest men in the city, the founder of a financial empire worth billions. A man who could buy every building on that street without blinking. But today, none of that mattered. Because this was not about money. It was about people. Jonathan watched Emily from a distance as she walked away. He noticed how she paused at a bus stop, how she checked her phone anxiously, how she rubbed her arms against the cold. She was struggling. And she still gave. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. This experiment, this test, had already given him its first answer. And it was devastating. Because in a city full of people who had everything, the only one who gave something away was the woman who had the least. Jonathan stood slowly, gripping the wall for balance. The game had changed. And tomorrow, he would test the world again. But this time, the cost of kindness and cruelty would be far higher. The truth behind the rags. Jonathan Hale had slept in penthouses that floated above cities like clouds. He had woken up to ocean views, private chefs, and silence bought with money so deep it erased inconvenience. But that night, he slept on a thin blanket behind a closed storefront, the hum of traffic replacing luxury, the taste of Emily Carter's kindness still lingering heavier than the sandwich in his stomach. He barely slept. Not because of the cold, but because his mind wouldn't let go of one simple question. Why would someone who had so little give so much? At dawn, Jonathan rose before the city fully stirred. He washed his face at a public restroom, studied his reflection in the cracked mirror, and barely recognized himself. The disguise was working too well. The tired eyes, the rough beard, the weight of invisibility pressing into his shoulders. This wasn't acting. This was reality, one he had avoided his entire life. Weeks earlier, Jonathan had vanished without warning. No board meetings. No press appearances. No luxury. His executives panicked. His assistants sent frantic messages. The media speculated about burnout, scandal, even death. But Jonathan had been deliberate. After his father's funeral, surrounded by relatives fighting over inheritance and strangers praising him for his wealth, something inside him cracked. He had wondered then, if all of this disappeared, who would still see me? So he left. No entourage. No credit cards. No safety net. Just a small amount of cash hidden away and a decision to observe humanity from its lowest rung. What he found unsettled him. He had been cursed at. Mocked. Spit near. Once, a store owner chased him away with a broom. Another time, a man dressed like a pastor warned him that poverty was punishment. Jonathan never argued. He watched. He recorded reactions not with cameras, but with memory. And every day, the same pattern repeated. Those with much gave nothing. Those with nothing barely survived. Until Emily. Later that morning, Jonathan returned to the same street corner. Not because he needed food, but because he needed answers. Emily appeared just after noon, moving fast, her jacket unzipped, her face tense. She was late for something, he could tell. She slowed when she saw him again. "Oh," she said, surprised. "You're still here?" "Yes," Jonathan replied. She hesitated, then crouched slightly. "Did you eat?" "I did," he said. "Thank you." She smiled faintly. "Good." Jonathan studied her more closely now. The way she stood, protective of her bag. The dark circles under her eyes. The calluses on her fingers. "You work nearby?" he asked. "2 places," she said with a tired laugh. "Depends on the day." "And yet," Jonathan said carefully, "you still helped me." Emily shrugged. "I know what it's like to be hungry." That was all she said. But it was enough. Jonathan felt something twist inside him. "You could have ignored me," he pressed. "So could everyone else," she replied gently. But they didn't stop either. She checked her watch, panic flashing briefly across her face. "I have to go. I hope today's better for you." Then she hurried away again. Jonathan remained seated long after she disappeared. That was when the final piece fell into place. Emily wasn't kind because she expected reward. She was kind because pain had taught her empathy. And that, Jonathan realized, was rare. Dangerously rare. That evening, Jonathan sat alone on a park bench and made a call from a prepaid phone. "It's me," he said quietly. A pause. Then a voice filled with relief. "Sir, we've been trying to reach you." "I know," Jonathan replied. "I need something prepared." "Anything." Jonathan watched the sun dip below the skyline. "I want a test," he said calmly. "One that reveals who people are when there's no advantage to being good." There was hesitation on the line. "Sir, this could hurt someone." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "It already does," he said. Every day. Silence. Then, understood. The call ended. Jonathan stood and pulled his coat tighter around himself. He didn't smile. He didn't feel powerful. What he felt instead was resolve. Because kindness like Emily's should never be punished. And cruelty, especially casual cruelty, should never go unseen. Tomorrow, the world would be tested again. But this time, it wouldn't be about ignoring a beggar. It would be about what happens when kindness becomes inconvenient. And truth demands a price. When kindness became a crime. The next day began like any other. The city breathed, rushed, ignored. Emily Carter stood behind the counter of a small convenience store near the bus terminal, tying her apron with fingers that already ached from the morning shift at the diner. This job was supposed to be temporary, just enough to help pay for her mother's medication, but temporary had stretched into months. She smiled at customers. She counted change carefully. She tried not to think about how little sleep she'd had. What she didn't know was that today would test her in a way poverty never had. Across the street, Jonathan Hale watched through the glass window. He wore the same torn jacket, the same unwashed clothes, the same tired face. But his eyes were sharper now. Focused. This was the part he hated. Because this test wouldn't just reveal the world. It would hurt someone innocent. Inside the store, Emily stocked shelves while the cashier stepped away for a break. A delivery man passed by, a customer complained loudly, and for a brief moment, just seconds, the counter was unattended. That was when Jonathan stepped inside. No one paid him attention. That alone was proof enough. He moved slowly, deliberately. As Emily bent to pick up fallen boxes, Jonathan placed a leather wallet, thick, expensive, near her bag by the counter. Then he stepped back. Waited. Minutes passed. The cashier returned. A man shouted, "Hey, my wallet!" Chaos erupted instantly. Security alarms rang. People turned. Eyes searched. Someone pointed. "It's her," a woman said. She was right there. Emily froze. "What?" she whispered. "No, I didn't." A guard grabbed her arm roughly. Step away from the counter." "I didn't take anything," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Please. Check the cameras." The wallet lay on the floor near her bag. That was all the proof they needed. The same people who ignored the beggar yesterday leaned forward eagerly now. They wanted drama. They wanted someone to blame. Jonathan stood in the corner, heart pounding. This was worse than he imagined. Emily's eyes searched the room wildly, not for escape, but for understanding. No one offered it. They led her into the back office. Emily's hands trembled as she clasped them together, trying to stop herself from crying. "I didn't steal anything," she repeated softly. "I swear." The manager frowned. "We'll let the police decide." Police. The word crushed her. Emily thought of her mother, of the medicine she hadn't bought yet, of how one accusation could destroy the fragile balance of her life. Outside the office, Jonathan felt something twist violently in his chest. This was no longer an experiment. This was cruelty disguised as procedure. He stepped forward. The office door opened. The room went quiet. People laughed when they saw him. "Oh great," someone scoffed. "The beggar's back." Jonathan ignored them. He walked straight to the manager and spoke clearly. "I placed the wallet." Silence hit the room like a slap. "What?" the manager said. "I put it there," Jonathan repeated. "She didn't steal anything." Laughter broke out. "This is a joke," someone said. Jonathan straightened his posture, removed his cap, spoke again, this time with a voice that carried authority no disguise could hide. "My name is Jonathan Hale." Phones came out instantly. Faces changed. Someone whispered, "No way." Jonathan continued, calm but firm. "I staged this incident," he said, "because yesterday, this woman gave her only meal to a stranger." He turned to Emily. She showed kindness when no one else did. Emily stared at him, stunned. Jonathan faced the manager. "And today, you were ready to destroy her life without listening." The manager's mouth opened, then closed. Security stepped back. Apologies poured in. But Jonathan wasn't finished. "I wanted to see how people treat the powerless," he said quietly. "Today, I saw it." He looked around the room. No investigation. No compassion. Just accusation. Emily's tears finally fell, not from fear now, but from release. Jonathan walked to her side. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You never deserved this." She could barely speak. Why would you do this?" Jonathan met her eyes. Because the world only notices kindness when it becomes inconvenient, he replied. The room was silent. The truth had landed. And it was heavy. Later, as Emily sat alone outside the store, shaking, Jonathan stood beside her. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. Emily wiped her tears. I just didn't understand. I know, Jonathan replied. But you passed a test few people ever do. She looked up at him. What test? He smiled sadly. Being human, he said. And somewhere deep inside Jonathan Hale, something changed. Because wealth could buy silence. Power could command attention. But kindness was the rarest currency of all. And today, the world had almost destroyed it. When truth steps into the light, news of what happened inside the convenience store didn't stay quiet. It never does when truth collides with shame. By evening, videos were already circulating online. Clips of a trembling young woman being accused. Screenshots of Jonathan Hale standing in the back office, his voice calm but firm. Headlines followed quickly, half of them wrong, the other half incomplete. Billionaire stages social experiment. Poor woman falsely accused. Kindness test goes too far. Emily didn't read any of it. She sat in her small apartment, the lights off, knees pulled to her chest, replaying the moment again and again. The accusation. The fear. The humiliation. And then, the reveal. Jonathan's face. His apology. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from co-workers. Messages from strangers. Some supportive. Some cruel. She turned the phone face down. She felt exposed. Like the world had opened her life without asking. Jonathan, on the other hand, stood before a room full of lawyers and executives. They were angry. This was reckless. One of them snapped. You put the company at risk, another added. Public sympathy can turn fast. Jonathan listened quietly. Then he spoke. She could have gone to jail, he said, for being kind. The room fell silent. I will not apologize for exposing a system that nearly crushed an innocent person, Jonathan continued. If my reputation suffers, so be it. One lawyer leaned forward. And the woman? Jonathan's eyes hardened. She will be protected. The next morning, Emily's doorbell rang. She almost didn't answer. When she finally did, Jonathan stood in the hallway, clean now, dressed simply, his face serious. I wanted to come myself, he said. Emily stepped aside slowly. They sat at her small kitchen table. Jonathan noticed the empty cupboards, the stack of unpaid bills. This isn't charity, he said before she could speak. It's accountability. He explained everything. The experiment. The reason. The mistake. I used your pain to teach a lesson, he admitted. And that wasn't fair. Emily listened quietly. When he finished, she asked one question. Why me? Jonathan didn't hesitate. Because you were the only one who stopped. Silence stretched between them. Then Emily exhaled. I don't want to be famous, she said. I just want to live without fear. Jonathan nodded. And you will, he promised. Later that day, a public statement was released. Jonathan Hale took full responsibility. The store apologized publicly. Charges were formally dismissed. Security footage was released clearing Emily completely. But Jonathan went further. He announced the creation of a foundation, one focused on wrongful accusations, poverty and justice, and dignity for the overlooked. Emily was offered a position. Not as a symbol. As a voice. You don't have to accept, Jonathan told her. She looked at the paperwork, then at him. I'll do it, she said quietly. But only if this helps people like me. Jonathan smiled. That's the only reason it exists. That evening, Emily stood on the same street corner where she had met Jonathan. The wall was still there. The sidewalk unchanged. But something felt different. People noticed. Some smiled. Some looked ashamed. A few stopped to offer food to someone else sitting there now. Emily watched, heart heavy but hopeful. Jonathan stood a few steps back. You didn't just help me, he said softly. You changed me. Emily shook her head. I just did what felt right. Jonathan nodded. Exactly. And in that moment, both of them understood something powerful. Truth doesn't arrive gently. It disrupts. It exposes. But when it finally steps into the light, it gives kindness a fighting chance. Tomorrow, the world would argue about motives and headlines. But tonight, something quieter and far more important had begun. The cost of being kind. The world didn't become kinder overnight. If anything, it became louder. The headlines shifted quickly from sympathy to suspicion. Woman paid for kindness? Billionaire manipulates poverty for publicity? Was it all staged? Emily saw her face everywhere. Not the tired woman behind the counter. Not the daughter struggling to keep her mother alive. But a symbol. And symbols are easy to tear apart. The first threat came 3 days later. An envelope slipped under her apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You stole that wallet. You just got lucky. Her hands shook as she read it. The accusation hurt more than the fear. Because it meant the lesson hadn't reached everyone. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, knees drawn close, wondering if kindness had been a mistake. Jonathan faced his own storm. Investors withdrew. Partners distanced themselves. A board member resigned publicly, calling his actions emotionally irresponsible. You've weakened the company, one executive said coldly. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. No, he replied. I've revealed it. He refused to back down. He refused to issue a softer apology. Because every time he thought of Emily crying in that back office, something in him hardened. There were consequences he would accept. There were compromises he would not. Then came the worst moment. Emily's mother collapsed. At the hospital, machines beeped in steady rhythm as doctors spoke in low, careful tones. Stress doesn't help, one said gently. Emily stood frozen, guilt flooding her chest. If I hadn't stopped for that beggar. Jonathan arrived quietly. No cameras. No announcements. He stood beside her through the night, saying nothing, understanding that sometimes presence mattered more than words. Her mother survived. Barely. But that night changed Emily. She looked at Jonathan in the hospital hallway and said something that shook him. Being kind almost destroyed my life. Jonathan didn't argue. Because it was true. Weeks later, Emily stood before a small group of people at the Foundation's first public event. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. I was accused because it was easier than listening, she said. I was almost punished because I was poor. The room was silent. I don't want praise, she continued. I want protection, for people who don't have lawyers or platforms. Applause followed. Not loud. Respectful. Earned. Jonathan watched from the back. He had lost money. He had lost influence. But he had gained something wealth never gave him before. Clarity. Later that night, he returned alone to the street where this began. A different man sat against the wall now. Jonathan knelt. Offered food. The man looked up, surprised. Thank you, he whispered. Jonathan stood and walked away. No cameras. No lesson. Just humanity. Emily never became rich. She became something harder. Braver. She still stopped for strangers, but now with boundaries, wisdom, and strength. She learned that kindness without courage can be crushed. But kindness protected by truth can change systems. Kindness is not weakness, but it comes with a cost. The world often punishes goodness before it rewards it. Never mistake silence for guilt or poverty for dishonesty. Real change doesn't come from experiments. It comes from accountability. And perhaps the hardest truth of all. Being kind won't always save you. But without it, nothing else is worth saving. Kindness doesn't always get rewarded. Sometimes, it gets punished. Emily didn't stop because she wanted attention. She stopped because someone was hungry. And for that simple act, she was accused, threatened, and nearly destroyed. Jonathan didn't pretend to be poor to feel powerful. He did it to understand something terrifying. How easily good people suffer in silence. While cruelty walks free. This story isn't about a billionaire. It isn't even about a beggar. It's about what the world does when goodness becomes inconvenient. So ask yourself, if kindness cost you everything, would you still choose it? Because the truth is, the world applauds goodness. Only when it's safe. If this story made you uncomfortable, comment I see it now. If you believe the poor are judged faster than the powerful, press like so this message reaches someone who needs it. And if you've ever been kind and paid for it in silence, subscribe. This channel tells the stories most people are afraid to face. In part 2, the threats don't stop. The accusations get louder, and Emily is forced to choose. Stay kind, or survive. Because when the world turns on you, kindness alone may not be enough. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next story won't just test your emotions. It will test your conscience.